Welcome to the third session of Design United's conference, Small Measures, Great Impact. The speakers for this session are emerging multidisciplinary designer from Nepal, Dheeraj Manandar, designer Ayaka Yamashita, and German architect Jan Glasmeier, who works in the Thai-Burma border. This session is being compared by Kavindu Deseran and moderated by architects Ayush Gangwal and Vrinda Kanvinde.
My journey in the past 10 years, you can say. So I studied in Germany, and then after my diploma in Germany, I moved to the UK, worked for various relatively big architecture firms in the UK, but then also later on in Southeast Asia, in Singapore. And this is sort of like where I might start now with my story. So we moved there in 2010, my wife and I, and worked for a big firm on big development projects. After this contract, 1.5 years that I lived there, I was a little bit lost also in my own approach to architecture. I didn't really know where the next step would be, where we would be going. The plan was initially to move back to Europe, either to the UK or maybe to another place. And so my wife is working more into the developing world. So she found a job in Thailand on the Thai-Burma border, in a little border town called Mae Sot. And while I was still working in Singapore, she moved out there, and she took on this job as a fundraising manager for a local organization, a community-based organization called Maytao Clinic. This is also where I'm starting this story. So Maytao Clinic is a hospital that works with the migrant communities, for the Karen migrant communities along the Thai-Burma border. It was founded in 1989 by a lady called Dr. Cynthia Mong. She was since also nominated for the Peace Nobel Prize. She is from the Karen community, who on either side of the Thai-Burma border, they live on the Burmese side and on the Thai side. When I arrived there in 2012, there was this story about that the clinic had to be moved, or had to move, because of the rise in land prices. This border town became a special economic zone between Burma and Thailand. So obviously the land prices went up. The old clinic was directly on the Asian highway, which is going through this border town as well. So, and it was sort of a situation where I came in that, they were in need of having an architect, or finding an architect. And relatively quickly it became clear that my short visit, because I basically came there to maybe take a month or two off, and then move back with my wife to Europe, as might be becoming a longer story, a longer thing. And after volunteering for the first year, this clinic offered me a position as the architect, or a kind of half position, because I was sharing it with another architect from Spain who was also there at that time. And we were starting designing a master plan for this hospital on a very small sort of kind of fee that we got paid, which was in the area of $400 per month. And so we started designing this, and we obviously had a lot of things to do. And in the end, it became a campus of almost 30 buildings. In the first phase of my stay there, Albert Compagnie, who's the Spanish architect that I then was working with, and Lina Ramstad, she's a Norwegian architect, landscape architect. She's founded Goyo Goyo over there. We were designing these temporary dormitories for the hospital that I just mentioned, Maytao Clinic. And it was a relatively complex and challenging exercise for us because these dormitories had to be built in a relatively short period of time with a very, very small budget. And the idea was that they were just temporary, as I mentioned, so they should be moved later on. We then obviously went to talk to local wood people over there. So you have a lot of wood that has high quality, comes from old buildings, but it's still relatively strong. It's teak wood mainly. And we came up with this model, something that could be, multiplied. So we create a sort of frame, which you see here on the top right, which then you build it one time, and later on you put it on the floor and you just multiply the frames. In the bottom right picture, you see how you then can place these frames every 3 meters. That was sort of the spacing in between, which creates then a room on either side of this internal corridor that you see in the middle of the building. So I go a little bit further. Here you see in interior pictures. I'm going through these old projects a little bit quicker to then in the end come to a project that I was lucky to do early this year. But here you see basically the inside, not yet with the partitions between the rooms, but you get a really good glimpse and idea of how the structure is working, the spaces that it's creating. As you see, we used a lot of bamboo ourselves, local leaf roofs, either thatch or in this case, it was actually a leaf that we used. You can already buy them there as a sheet, already prepared and relatively cheap. And one of these buildings in the end, we had in total for 5 of these buildings, $7,700 at around $8,000. So divided by 5, you can, it's about $1,500 to $1,600. And each of these dormitories in the end had space for 20 to 25 students. So I'm going a little bit further now. Something is not working with my presentation. Sorry for that. So here you see the other part of the so-called training center. The dormitories that I just mentioned were one part. This was the other part. This were the 2 training rooms, the 2 classrooms, in this case relatively big. And what we did a lot in Thailand is to try to work as local as possible, using material that we can find at the place. So in this case, this is a really nice picture to illustrate this, because here at the front you see a pond, and in this pond was the soil that we then used to produce the adobe bricks to then later build these 2 classrooms. So you dig a hole, you create a form, you have a material that you mix with a local fiber. In this case, we used a lot of rice husk, mainly rice husk, because it's a material that is a waste material over there and you can buy it relatively cheap. And then you produce the bricks and you use the same material as a mortar for in between the rows of bricks. And then you create this sort of space. Later on, you will see a few more pictures about the process. That's what I was showing in the project that I did this year. So this is the inside of the room. Obviously, adobe, as probably a lot of you know, is a sort of intelligent material. It keeps the heat outside during the day, so it keeps the room inside relatively cool. We also, as you see, we never really tried to close off the sides or put in a ceiling to allow the natural airflow through the building. The room, as you saw, was built in 2012. It's still used sort of every day. We also have renovated it a couple of times. Adobe wall or a mud wall, you just overplaster it and then the wall looks like new. So this was the other half, the other part of this training center that we built for this clinic, sort of our first job over there. And what was great, obviously, to have this opportunity to be living in this border town community, which is a very vibrant, very diverse community, because it has obviously a very big Thai community since it is on the Thai side, but also a very big Burmese community. It has a big sort of Burmese market, which has a lot of goods from the Thai side, but also from the Burmese side. It has a lot of NGOs over there, community-based organizations that look into human rights issues in Myanmar, organizations that deal with health issues, like this community-based organization that I was working for, but also in education. So it was a big hub. There were a lot of very interesting people, and we sort of created for ourselves, that was also important, that we were trying to create a very strong bond with the communities. No, not that we're just going into communities, we're doing our thing, and then we're leaving again and leave everything behind, because I think that's a relatively complicated and most of the time not the approach that you want. You want to really engage, you want to really talk and work with the communities and involve them, make them participate in the process, in the design process, in the build process, and also make sure that after you sort of leaving the space, that there is an ownership, there's a feeling of ownership for these communities, that the communities themselves are able to go back and renovate and maintain the building. And then obviously that you not make a top-down decision on saying, okay, this is what we want, this is what we feel is right for you, because you know, I'm not probably ever in the position to understand a very complex cultural background that well, that I can say this is right for you, you know. So it's very important to really put as much effort into this process of like understanding, communicating, and not trying to enforce anything. So this is another project that we did a couple of years after that. It was a school that was kind of cracking in a lot of parts, and you see the building here on the right-hand side. So the building had to be evacuated. People had to be put into sort of emergency classrooms, and we were able to do that for most of the classes except for the 2 highest grades. So we had this little funding from the organization who originally built the school, $2,000. To build these temporary classrooms. In this case, we used a steel structure because it had to be built relatively fast. This is the inside. It's a very airy space. It has a lot of natural lighting inside. Yeah, it was used for probably a year and a half before it was then taken down and moved to, so sort of separated in the middle, and then moved to 2 other schools who are still using these rooms to this date. And again, the material, the roof material is known by the local communities. It's very easy to fix, it's very easy to maintain, and it's very easy to replace these sheets if you have to. This is another picture then in the evening. A lot of night classes, or they call it night school, were happening in these buildings, where, you know, the students who are preparing for their final exams are sort of teaching and learning, and yeah, even in the evening it was a very nice climate inside. So I think the school at the end was a little bit sad that we had to move it, but that was the initial or original sort of arrangement. Yeah, so a little bit more later again, we had this, this was a project that we were asked to work in through actually our job, through the hospital that we were working for. So they got approached, had this very strong connection to this community in Mesot. So this was a purely Karen learning center on the Thai side. And we had a very small budget, and there was a relatively big number of students in the school. I think at the time where we started building, it was almost 400. It took us almost a year and a half to build this whole school due to funding issues. Here on the left side, you see the overall master plan. You can see it's 11 classrooms, and then at the bottom you see it's a little canteen space and a kitchen. And we had to build it in phases, also due to the seasons in in Thailand along the border. So we have a relatively long wet season, which could start early June and can last until mid-October. So within that time, it's almost impossible to build with natural materials such as adobe bricks or earthen bricks. And we had funding from a Canadian organization to build the first phase. And then we had to wait a whole rainy season to build the second phase. So that's why it took us relatively long to complete the school. Here at the bottom again, bottom right, you see these are the forms that we use for our adobe bricks, and then the bags of rice husk that we use as a mixing material. So this is the internal corridor then later on of the school. So the idea was to separate the classrooms from each other, create these in-between spaces that can be used for gardening, for these individual classrooms, that they're taking care of the space that they are facing, and create either a garden or whatever they feel like. Here a few more pictures of these individual sort of rooms. We gave it a color coding. We later on had a green one, and we had a dark blue and a light blue, red, orange. So there's a sort of identification for the students with their own rooms, and then all the facades at the beginning, at the front, so the front facade towards the corridor, we created a different design. Here you see it, and on the left side, this orange had these diagonals and horizontal elements. And many of these windows were actually designed not by us, it were designed by the community, by the headmaster of the school, even by our workers. So in this project, it was very nice to see that all this community came together, the teachers, the parents of the students, and they joined in the process of building the classrooms and, you know, creating this very strong bounds to actually this learning space. This is another picture of the inside of the space. Yeah, I'm going a little bit further. And then, yes, I actually want to talk a little bit more also about what has changed in my approach. So I had a good 6.5, 7 years in this border town. I arrived there early 2012, and then privately for my wife and myself, things changed a little bit. So at the end of 2018, we moved back to Europe. Mainly, I'm from Germany myself. My wife is from the UK, so we are mainly living in the UK now. But I still try to connect and try to keep this very strong connection to the community over there. So from my approach, I try to go back and build at least one project with a organization from the UK, which is called Acorn Overseas, in Mesot, in this border town. In 2019, we built a project with 2 classrooms and a toilet block of six washrooms and toilet rooms. And then early this year, I was very lucky before COVID really hit, also Thailand and Southeast Asia in general, but also Europe, to be able to do this small little classroom project within 5 weeks. So we didn't have much time, but we had really good connections. And since 2018, I'm trying to connect a lot to universities, architecture faculties, or even high schools in Bangkok. And in this case, we had a student group from the Assumption University in Bangkok joining the process for a 3-day mud brick workshop. And then we had this Harrow International School from Bangkok, which is a college, also coming with almost 40 students for a couple of days to also join in. So the process of building and working with mud bricks and adobe bricks is obviously very, very fun, and it's very easy to communicate, and it's very easy to engage young people in working with this material, because it's just fun. You can get really dirty during the day, and then you jump under the shower, and you really feel like you can engage these young students very easily. So Here you see a few pictures from this project. So also different colors of clay, which is interesting. You know, when you dig a hole somewhere, sometimes the soil is very grayish, sometimes very reddish, sometimes very very dark, as in the picture on the top right. And we had a very good feeling at the very beginning. So I went to this school the first time in 2019. Talked to the headmaster, talked to the local organization that is helping these or is working with these local learning centers, which is Burma Migrant Worker Education Committee. And we had a good feeling, or I had a good feeling, to go back there in 2020 and replace or build this classroom. At the location where we built the classroom was actually a carport, which was like a very light roof sitting on 4 eucalyptus poles. At night, it was, as I said, the car park for the school bus, and during the day, it was used as a classroom. So that was the building that we then replaced. And here at the top left, you see also the kids from the school engaging. These are students at the bottom from the Assumption University. And then I also had some volunteers there from Thailand, but also from Europe, who joined in for these 5 weeks. And yeah, I show a few details of like how we, for example, solved one of the columns at the front, one of the columns for the roof structure, with a very minimum amount of concrete, which is for me and for us in general very important to reduce the amount of concrete as much as possible. We had the original plan to do even an earthen floor inside the classroom, and we did some testing. We relatively quickly realized that the time is not enough, and unfortunately we later on had to also pour a concrete slab inside the room to make it more durable. Yeah, this is, you see how it's developing, a very light structure, obviously. This is all secondhand. This is all timber and wood that we found in the timber shops just around the corner. We also hired 2 workers from the local community, Burmese workers, who, you know, at the beginning is always this thing of like learning from each other, seeing each other, how we are working. And I mean, in the end, it became a very, yeah, good connection and a good relationship. And yeah, we sort of became friends during the project. And I was promising them that I will come back in 2021, so early next year, February. But sadly, a month ago, I've made the decision that it's, due to COVID, not really possible for me to go. So I postponed the project for 2022. Hopefully in February 2022, I will be able to go back to Mesod for a period of maybe 2.5 months to build a bigger project with yeah, local organizations that already contacted me. So going a little bit further, and yeah, here you see you know, how messy you can actually work with a material clay. At the beginning, you can just throw it on the wall. It becomes, yeah, this it doesn't even look like a wall, to be honest. And then, yeah, you can later on take down the material and make it very smooth and plaster it with, you know, either a lime plaster, or in this case, we use tapioca, which is a sort of starch, a local starch, similar to like potato starch or rice starch. We use this tapioca plant. And here's the ingredient that we use as a mortar between the bricks. So we basically use the same mix as we use for the bricks. We're not differentiating there. And, you know, the more you use at the beginning, the better. You know, you just throw it on the wall and then put on the next brick. And it's really something that is learned probably or understood in 10 minutes. And yeah, everyone can basically do it. Testing of the roof structure. Yeah, you see, it is a little bit bendy, but for what we built there, I think it was probably, yeah, kind of enough. And it became a proper frame. So it's not just a single one at the bottom, it's actually a proper sort of beam that we built. And here on the left, you see already, so on the right, you see still a sort of relatively raw wall. On the left, you see already a wall that we plastered one time. And then later on, it became very smooth. This is from the front. Obviously, the material of earth likes curves. You can shape any sort of curve that you like in a horizontal way or in a vertical way. For here, for example, the entrance part, we chamfered the left wall a little bit down, so it becomes more like an inviting gesture. And here at the front, this is the window into the sort of open courtyard, and this is how it looked in the front. And we introduced this little bench space. And yeah, so we were really lucky. As I mentioned earlier, we were literally finishing this project around March 18th, and I flew out on March 19th, and 2 days later, Thai Airways sort of canceled all the flights to Europe, and I got a friend who got stuck in Thailand for the following 8 weeks until she was able to fly back to the UK. So this is sort of the final classroom in the end. For the main roof, we used recycle metal sheets. And for the front roof, for the smaller part of the roof, we used these local leaves. And yeah, overall the budget, I think I don't know if I showed this, was around $2,000 for the whole building. It's about 25 square meters. And yeah, I think here in the back, you see the old classroom, which are literally just concrete blocks and sometimes not even plastered, and no really floor in the building. And I think this was a really good addition to this school campus. So I talked already about my future plans for next year. Unfortunately, I won't be able to do a project myself. But currently, I'm also teaching and working at Base Habitat at the University of the Arts in Linz in Austria. And one of my students who actually invited me, she's probably also currently listening in the other room. She will be moderating probably the next session. She's also there, and this is us at the top left corner, and at the bottom right corner is the group of students. And yeah, and for next year, there was also the plan to start the next program in February. But I think so far it has been postponed until September next year. The idea is it's a 3-semester course. We call us Builders of Change. So working exactly with the sort of, with natural material, but also with limited resources, with the migrant and refugee is Asia to do a project. So this was a sort of project that the university found for us. And so we're building currently a pavilion here, which will be completed in a couple of weeks. And this is the second semester, and then in the third semester, this through the master thesis. And yeah, so thank you for listening in. Obviously, if some of you are interested in joining a project, as I said, for next year, nothing is really planned. But then for 2022, yeah, you see my social media accounts, or even via my homepage. Please, yeah, contact me, and I will definitely reply to yeah, whoever writes me an email. And again, thank you very much for inviting. And yeah, like to have a discussion now in the panel. Thanks.